Welcome to the Joy Lab podcast, where we help you uncover and foster your most joyful self. Your hosts, Dr. Henry Emmons and Dr. Aimee Prasek, bring you the ideal mix of soulful and scientifically sound tools to spark your joy, even when it feels dark. When you're ready to experiment with more joy, combine this podcast with the full Joy Lab program over at joylab.coach.
Hello, I'm Henry Emmons.
And I'm Aimee Prasek. So welcome to Joy Lab. We infuse science with soul over here, focusing on creative, positive emotions and inner states that become the building blocks for a joyful life. So our element this month is awe. Awe is that experience of witnessing something without sort of being able to quite explain it, either because it's it sort of takes your breath away in the best way, or it's just so wonderfully mysterious, kind of like the human brain, I would say. And one of the most powerful benefits of awe is actually how it makes you kind of feel small amidst something bigger outside of yourself. So we'll talk a lot about that today. Kind of like the mystery of this big universe. But at the same time, awe sort of ignites a sense of connection. You know, you're part of this. You belong here. I really love how Einstein describes awe. He says, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. They to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. Their eyes are closed. All right, so what are we going to get into with awe today? Now, in episode 4, we talked about some really relatable obstacles to awe, like overgeneralization and filtering. So you can head over there after this one for those. But there's also a great practice in that one as well. It's called an awe walk. I think you'd really like that. So if you haven't been over there, go back and listen to that after this. But in this episode, we want to get into another common obstacle that stands in the way of awe, and it's self-evaluation, or more clearly, constant thoughts of comparing yourself to others. Or let me put it another way, getting caught up in your own trauma. So we'll learn more about using awe as a way to kind of escape this cycle. And we'll try to take a bit of an inside-outside awe journey to really pause with how awesome we really are and how awesome the world is around us. And I get it, that sort of sounds maybe too sugary. Awe sounds too sweet, too optimistic, but it really isn't. And I hope we kind of convince you of that if you're feeling that today. And I know I certainly did when I started to work in this element of awe. But it actually helps us to see the world more accurately. Like Einstein noted, it helps keep our eyes open. I think it also allows us to just kind of pause and give ourselves and everyone around us a glimpse of the bigger picture. And honestly, like the break we all deserve. So that's my, I think, clear line back to self-evaluation, this obstacle to awe we want to dig into today. And I'll just go out on a limb and say probably all of us listening are too hard on ourselves. I've certainly had a mean girl squatting in my brain for a lot of years. I get it. She comes back every now and again. Maybe you have a Regina George or a Draco Malfoy or a Biff Tannen, maybe whatever mean bully character from a movie that you can remember squatting in your mind. And when they take up residency, they're destructive and exhausting. So let's get into it. Henry, if you want to say more, certainly about awe, understanding that at the beginning of our conversation now, but also, can you talk more about this obstacle of self-evaluation and how it plays out before we actually sort of get into shutting those voices up?
Sure. And thank you, Aimee. I love the way that you introduced awe as being engaged by mystery. Mm-hmm. It sounds a little to me like being enchanted, as if like there was a spell cast over us or something. And I think in both awe and enchantment, there's this element of surprise, of kind of being delighted by something unexpected. Now, the premise of Joy Lab is that we don't have to wait. We don't have to be passive, for these good feelings like this to come along and just overtake us kind of magically.
Yeah.
In other words, we don't have to rely on chance. Now, I'm not saying that we can force ourselves to experience awe or enchantment, but maybe we can create the conditions for it so that instead of being something rare, it just becomes a regular part of the world we live in. I have a beautiful wall hanging in my office. It was a gift from a friend, and it has these words on it. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Now, these are the opening words from the Dhammapada, which we have referred to before. And I love how it just puts it right out there. Thinking is our central problem. And it is also our central opportunity. So we live in very different worlds depending on what direction we go in with our thoughts. So back to self-evaluation, which frankly is almost always negative self-evaluation.
Yeah.
Humans have always compared themselves to others, I suppose, but never before have we had these powerful accelerators, these images and social media and magazines and all the rest. You would have to be practically a Zen master to avoid comparing yourself to others. And how many teenage Zen masters do you know?
They're not on Instagram, right?
So I think most of us would be shocked, actually, if we really knew how many harsh, judging thoughts we have about ourselves every day. So if it's true that we make the world with our thoughts, is this really the world we would want to live in? I don't think so. I think if we knew we were choosing, that we would choose awe and enchantment instead. I think we would choose joy.
Yeah.
So, Aimee, I'd love to come back to this later, but first, how about taking us further on that little tour of awe and enchantment that you promised us earlier?
Yes, I love this. I find I want to take us into the body, which I find to be absolutely magical. So everyone, I think what we can do is pretend for a moment that we are Lieutenant Tuck Pendleton from the movie Inner Space, which I'm not ashamed to say was a movie I was obsessed with as a child and continue. And actually, as an aside, I'm starting to notice, Henry, that you pull much of your wisdom from ancient texts, whereas I generally pull from movies from the 80s and 90s. Which is maybe why we could talk forever about this stuff. Different perspectives. Yes. So as in Inner Space, we will shrink down and take a look at our amazing system. So I first love the idea that every atom in our body is nearly 15 billion years old. And we can dig into how amazing that is even more by just thinking that our bodies are made of matter, which is the product of exploding stars. So these sort of ever-existing atoms, like 7 octillion of them that make up your body, they are all stardust, right? We're all made of stardust, and just the perfect stardust assembled for you to come into life. So yeah, you listening, you are amazing. In each way that you move and that you think, no matter your ability, there is just like this expansive, interconnected, and ancient process that's happening within you. I kind of just also want to slam my fist on the counter and say there are no gifted or advanced among us. I mean, as maybe folks know, I have a 4-year-old, and there's so much talk about like gifted children, which is kind of frustrating to me, right? We're just all magnificently different and awkwardly fantastic. Nobody is made of smarter or better stardust, I sincerely believe. I really think we all have the same potential within us. And Darwin and population geneticists would also agree with that. So let's get into like legit inner space. So in all that stardust that is you have your human cells, about 37 trillion of them. And in each cell, you have chromosomes, 23 pairs of them. And in your chromosome 1, so just one of those, which is also the largest molecule in nature, there are 10 billion atoms. It's just mind-boggling. So let's travel to our brains. We don't know a thing really about the brain. Most scientists would agree, though, that the brain is the most complex thing that we've all witnessed, and it's astonishingly powerful. So your brain can make 100 trillion neural connections, and if you were to lay all of your neurons in a row, you could follow them to the moon and back. So I could go on and on bragging about how awesome you are listening, all of us. I know I can say it all day, but how can we really tap into that awesomeness of our body and brain, particularly if we're feeling sort of trapped by our body or a victim of our mind, or if our system just doesn't feel like it's working for us lately?
Well, let me first say that it's kind of weird and awesome, actually, to think of our bodies being made of stardust, and that that was created billions of years ago. It kind of makes me wonder, how did we get put together like this? And what holds us together, even through all of the stuff that we go through in our lives? When I look at it that way, I think we're actually doing pretty darn good. We are actually pretty healthy and resilient, considering that we could just be piles of lifeless, disconnected dust. So maybe we should look at our bodies differently, at least with a little respect, if not outright awe. Maybe it's time we befriended our bodies. I am going to go so far as to say that the path to awe, the path to joy even, goes right through the body. I think the simplest way for most of us to get out of our own way, to break our habitual ways of thinking and judging ourselves and so forth, the simplest way is to turn our attention to our bodies. I don't mean to look at your body and compare it to what you see on TV or online. I mean to simply experience your own body. Now, this is tricky because for a lot of us, as soon as we turn our attention to the body, the negative self-talk gets louder, if anything.
Yeah.
The tricky part is to realize that the solution is not necessarily to change your thinking. It's simply to break free of your thinking, to not engage it, to not believe it, basically just to ignore it. So how do you do that? How do you ignore your thinking mind? One way to do it is to have a physical experience and stay with that physical experience from one moment to another, which really can help you ignore the chatter of your mind. And if you do that, the mental chatter usually quiets down after a while anyway. So this can be really simple and really straightforward, kind of like just learning to stay with your breath, just experiencing each breath as a new physical sensation. The rise and the fall of your chest, or the miracle, really a miracle of how air gets transformed within a few seconds without any thought or effort on your part whatsoever. From the moment it enters your body until it leaves a few seconds later, it is changed. So if you allow it to, doing something as simple as this can literally free you up from your thinking, at least for a few minutes. And that alone can give you a fighting chance to decide for yourself what kind of thoughts you really want to have, what kind of world you really want to make for yourself. I remember just a few years ago attending a retreat on, I think it was called Neuroscience and Buddhism. And one of the speakers there was a really well-known neuroscientist and Buddhist practitioner named Dr. Richard Davidson. And he said something to this effect, that the key to having a meditation practice that can transform you, in other words, the key to enlightenment, if you will, is to be able to have a visceral experience. In other words, to be able to directly experience firsthand the inner workings of your body, to observe it in real time. Now, the part of you that has this visceral experience is called your observing self, and that is not caught up in your thoughts and your judgments. Your observing self is able to have a direct experience of awe in real time just by turning your attention to this miraculous living bag of stardust that we call our bodies.
Oh, I love that distinction of the observing self. I suppose also it's such a great reminder that it really starts with us, right? We can make that distinction. We can turn. If you want to see more on the world, then we see it in ourselves first. And not in your abilities or accomplishments, kind of as you were noting earlier, Henry, but like just right in there, in you, your breath, your heartbeat. And I think there's something here as well about then translating to see it in others as well. You know, seeing that they're doing their best to work with their stardust as well. So again, Henry, what are some ways we can more easily begin to see awe in others? And, how can that benefit us as well?
Well, there's that old joke about the narcissist who's having a conversation with someone, and after going on for quite a while about himself, he finally says, "Enough about me. What do you think about me?" It's just so easy, isn't it, to become self-absorbed.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be a narcissist to do that.
Right.
So you might call it ego or self-preservation or just plain old human nature. I think most of us get caught up in our own stories, our own drama. Now, sometimes that becomes outright painful. I see that a lot in people who are depressed, where that ruminative thinking about oneself and usually about all the things that have gone wrong or regrets and so forth, it becomes painful. But even if it's not harmful to us, that focus on the self still blocks our ability to connect with others, much less to take delight in them. Right. And I actually think that's one of the best reasons to cultivate more awe in our lives, because that will absolutely take us out of our self-focus, our absorption with ourselves. It's almost like a photographer, who's changing the settings on the camera or switching it out to a wider angle lens. Experiencing awe widens our view of the world from this narrow perspective that it's all about me to a place that becomes bigger and bigger. We see a bigger picture of the world and have maybe a more realistic view of where we fit into that.
Yeah.
So we can literally just create a greater, grander world for ourselves simply by taking ourselves out of the center of our universe, which happens by dropping our attachment to our personal story.
Mm-hmm. I love how awe helps us pull back that lens, and stepping out of that rumination and just stuck in that story, with that bigger view. You can really start to tap into those connections, like you're saying, Henry, and not just how supported we are by this bigger universe. It doesn't have to be so sort of maybe mysterious or big. Like, just in our own lives, we pull back the lens, we see how dynamic things are. Life isn't just so simple in the way our thinking might boil it down to. We talked about this in the last 2 episodes, which was really helpful, I think. And with awe, there's sort of this next step, something else that adds this feeling of support, like, immediately. So maybe a simple example, I think, is seasonal affective disorder. I was someone living in Minnesota, but not born here. This is very real for me, and I just did not understand it for so long. All I knew was that in February and March, my mood would tank. And so that sort of simplistic thinking would come in, God, what's wrong with me? What am I doing wrong? I thought I was coming out of my depression. I'm clearly not, and I'll be like this forever. And I'm so blah, blah, blah. This usual negative self-evaluative talk starts. But pulling the lens back allows us to take in so much more information. Can't make those same false self-accusations when you see all the variables, all the influencing factors that come in, that impact us. It's not just me, it's vitamin D, it's where I'm living. I'm part of this seasonal shift. And I think awe does that in such a powerful way. It really reminds us that we are part of a much bigger living system. And we share so much with that system: moods, growth, harmony, disharmony. And as our measurement abilities sort of advance, we're really starting to see this like on a cellular level, basic functions like respiration, you're talking about earlier, Henry. It looks similar in plants and animals, and so does our DNA. We humans share about half of our genetic information with plants, right? So our energy, our moods and behaviors shift during the season, during the seasons. And I think as well as we pull back the lens, as we start to see our connections with those around us, we really are able to make better sense of our suffering. So, let's go there more, because it really gets into the power of awe. How does our self-evaluative thinking, our suffering, and awe sort of play out?
Well, let me agree with you first about seasonal depression. It's hard to take it personally when you realize that you feel lousy just because the angle of the sun has changed. That
Right.
is not about you.
Powerful.
Yeah. So, that's actually a pretty nice, straightforward example, I think, of how we might be able to get ourselves out of this pickle that we're in. Because we all know that being human in the 21st century means that we are going to struggle and feel bad sometimes. But that was also true back in the 6th century BC, when Buddha stated the first noble truth that everyone suffers from time to time. No one is exempt. Now, that was and still is considered a very profound concept, but in a sense, it is just a statement of fact. It's not personal. It is part of the deal. And if you didn't live in Minnesota, let's say you live near the equator, Aimee, you would probably not have seasonal affective disorder, but I'm sure there'd be something else to deal with.
I'd find something else. Don't you worry.
So, so that is the diagnosis of the human condition, which
Yeah.
Thich Nhat Hanh calls simply ill-being. We suffer sometimes, but it doesn't last very long unless we feed it, like we do when we start thinking that we're doing something wrong because we feel bad in March. This year, who didn't feel bad in March and April, if you remember?
Yeah.
So that's what Thich Nhat Hanh called the making of ill feeling, that we do somehow feed this or create this. And that is the second noble truth, that basically with our thoughts, we make the world.
Mm.
And in this case, we are making trouble for ourselves. So the neuroscientist and author Robert Sapolsky put it this way. He said, "We have evolved to be smart enough to make ourselves sick."
Mm.
In other words, we think. We are capable of thinking. And sometimes that thinking takes us down that road towards greater suffering. So, what is the prognosis? Well, for seasonal affective disorder, it's actually really good. We know a lot about it now. We know how to prevent it. We know how to treat it. And if nothing else, if you wait until this time of year, it probably will get better on its own. The prognosis is also really good for this broader condition of being human. And that is what the third noble truth says, that we can be largely free of suffering, at least the kind of suffering that is created by our own thinking. Thich Nhat Hanh calls this simply well-being, in contrast to ill-being. And I love that because it is so simple and straightforward and easy to understand. Now, he also says that it is the cessation of ill-being, which is a little more of a complex notion, but it gets at that idea that all we need to do really is to stop thinking so harshly about ourselves, and this unnecessary suffering will stop just on its own. So the fourth noble truth then is the prescription, so to speak. It's what Thich Nhat Hanh called the path to well-being. And I love this image of a path, even if the path is meandering like mine is, because I like the sense of this being a journey and that there is a destination that we will get to eventually if we just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So for me, I like to imagine some of the actual paths I've been on, being surrounded by forests or lakes or mountains. And when I'm on those paths, if I just stop thinking for a little while and I'm surrounded by this beauty of nature, I am more or less constantly enchanted by it. I'm in awe of that beauty. That's how I think we can access awe. I think it is simply what happens when we're able to set our thinking aside and get out of our own way for a little while.
I love that you pulled in those noble truths, Henry. They just stretch across, religions and philosophies of living, toward a meaningful, balanced life. So I think also using that image of a path that we walk is really helpful. We don't just sit and wait for the ache, the suffering to magically float away. Like you said earlier, it's not passive. It's not just thoughts and prayers with, sitting on a rock. We can do something about it, or the way we're feeling about it, because we're part of it too, no matter what it is. And it's not easy, but it's there for us. And when it comes to sad, I take Resilient Remedies vitamin D3 October through April, 5,000 IUs of the good stuff. And I use a sad light for 20 minutes daily. I also make sure I do my group exercise classes, as anybody knows me, that I'm pretty obsessed with. They boost my mood during those months. And so, I think with awe, with that bigger vision, we're able to see those truths with so much more space and kindness. And we give ourselves and others a break. We move out of rigidity. We can start to see this awesome bigger picture and are able to sort of walk that path of well-being with more joy. And that conversation and going over those noble truths as well, Henry, all of our discussion here today, it's reminding me of that story of the two monks and a woman. So maybe we can kind of close up together with that. I'll try my best to share it. So there's an elder monk and a fresh out of monk school monk traveling a path together. They're discussing monk things. Clearly, I'm not a monk. And they come to a fast-moving river. The monks, are getting ready to cross this river when they see a young woman trying to cross. She was having trouble in the fast current, so she flags them over, hollers, asks for their help. Now, the problem here is that the two monks had taken a vow to never touch a woman for whatever reason. The young monk is standing there, sort of deer in headlights, holding tight to his vow, and the elder monk begins to move toward the woman. Without a word, he picks her up and carries her across the river. So the young monk follows, sort of speechless. His mentor has broken his vow, and they don't speak at all as they continue walking down the path, hour after hour after hour. You just got to see the young monk just sort of ruminating through the ordeal in his mind, hour after hour. He touched a lady, blasphemous, hour. Finally, the young monk speaks out and he asks his mentor, his elder monk, how could you carry her across the river? You took a vow to never touch a woman. And the elder monk responds, well, I set her down after helping her cross the river hours ago, safely on the bank. Why are you still carrying her? I love that. Just as you were speaking before, Henry, sometimes just putting those thoughts aside, then we create space and then we can see what's ahead of us. We can be open to awe. So I'm just imagining, many of us maybe just need to take off some luggage, put it aside.
Yeah. Set some things aside. And, it reminds me of one last quote that maybe we'll end on here that is also from Thich Nhat Hanh. And, Thich Nhat Hanh loves to talk about what he calls interbeing, how there are these opposites, and we need them. We need to have things that are opposite from one another. It really helps us to kind of understand and move toward the real goal that we all want to get to. Mm. And so here's his quote, which is also a quote about walking this path that we're talking about. Hell and paradise are both available in each step. Oof. Hell and paradise are both available in each step.
Yeah.
So we are walking these paths. We are making the world that we live in with our thoughts. And we do have some choices about that. And I think this awareness, which we can have at any given moment, we can tune in and be aware. Right now, do I feel more like paradise or more like hell? And it's a really, really quick way of knowing kind of how we're walking, how we're thinking, the path that we're on at that moment. And we can change it with that next step.
Yeah.
So until next time, be conscious of your steps and conscious of the awe and enchantment that is right around the next corner of your path.
Thank you for listening to the Joy Lab podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, visit joylab.coach to subscribe for your monthly infusion of joy and to learn more about the full Joy Lab program. Be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.